Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul, the podcast that transcends the boundaries between science and spirituality. Prepare to be uplifted, transformed, and awakened to create a path to healing your own life physically, emotionally, and spiritually by bridging the gap between science and soul. Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul. Today's guest is Dr. Mark Pitstick, MADC, who has over 50 years of experience in hospitals, pastoral counseling, mental health, and holistic healthcare. His diverse training includes degrees in zoology, clinical psychology, pastoral counseling, and chiropractic health. He has also completed extensive postgraduate studies in clinical nutrition. From a young age, Mark experienced clairaudient and clairsentient abilities, leading to profound spiritual insights. His work explores life's biggest questions, including consciousness, the afterlife, and holistic wellness. He has authored multiple books, including Soul Proof and The Shining Lights, Parents Speak, and co-authored Greater Reality Living with Dr. Gary Schwartz. Mark has produced documentaries, hosted radio shows, and collaborated with renowned experts such as Dr. Brian Weiss and Dr. Raymond Moody. As a research assistant for the SoulPhone Project, he contributes to groundbreaking studies on afterlife communication. He also supports helping parents heal, offering guidance to bereaved families, navigating grief, and spiritual connection. Mark, I am really excited to have you as a guest today.
Thank you, Lottie. Thank you for this conversation. I know it's going to be wonderful.
You have such a varied background, with over 50 years of experience helping people in hospitals, pastoral counseling, mental health centers, holistic healthcare, alongside an impressive educational background. I mean, you studied zoology, theology, clinical psychology, and became a chiropractor. So what initially drew you to this work of studying the afterlife and the soul and the survival of the soul? How have these, various disciplines influenced your work in this approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in retrospect, it's a lot more clear, excuse me, than it was at the time. So there's some good evidence from multiple sources, Lottie, that I never totally forgot where I came from. And for example, when I was 6 years old, my parents were showing me a beautiful sunset, and I told them it reminded me of God. And they only told me that 20 years later when I was in theology school, because we were brought up Lutheran. It was God the Father this and God the Father that. And then through my life as a young person, I felt like a stranger in a strange land. Human ways didn't make sense. I kind of had to learn how to be on earth. And you're shaking your head. Yeah.
I get it.
As soon as I heard about yoga and meditation, I took to it like a duck to water. And so I've been doing both for 50 years. But my real, and I had some clairaudient experiences. I describe them in one of my articles I can find. And, where I'd be sitting in church and there'd just be this voice. And I don't see much difference between my excuse me, inner voice and the voice of spirit these days. But it was just saying, well, regarding a eternal fire hell, well, they have that one a little mixed up, and regarding the nature of heaven and regarding us all having special reasons for being here. So I had lessons all along the way. It seems like every year or two. So then fast forward to I'm 19, I'm working in hospitals part-time as a respiratory therapist as I work my way through pre-med. And soon they trained me to do all sorts of things that only physicians can do now: cardiopulmonary resuscitation, putting the breathing tube down into the lungs, pulling arterial blood gas samples, etc. Pretty heavy stuff for a 19, 20-year-old. And so I was involved. I worked night shift, And every shift, I was around one or two people as they died. And, that was a lot. And especially seeing little kids pass just shifted everything for me. So I thought, okay, perhaps the most important thing I can do is discover, is there really a creator, a caring, intelligent creator? Is there really an afterlife? Or does that fall in the same category as Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny? And humans just can't face reality. So that began then the search that I've done ever since. And I'm glad to share with people that the findings are all great news. The cosmos is set up more wonderfully than we can imagine.
Oh, I love that. I love how you also mentioned something about now is there is it's almost like there's no difference, the spirit voice and your own voice. What do you mean by that?
Well, one of the, well, let me back up a little. I've learned so much from near-death experiences, and when I worked in hospitals for 6 years, whenever we would code someone and they would survive, I would make a point of interviewing them afterwards if I could, and I would, I had some training then, so I would ask open-ended questions. I'm curious, did you experience anything while you were nearly dead? And so I was the first person that many of these people talked to who had near-death experiences. Also, some people had what I call afterlife contacts instead of after-death communications. Terminal lucidity, deathbed visions, they fascinated me. And so that led to me then uh, applying that over time, and then my growth of understanding about the nature of reality. So talk about near-death experiences. Many of them come back saying the same thing. We each are one with the one and part of source. And so you know how it is. Jesus said when you're a child, you speak as a child and understand as a child. Well, so in the beginning, I thought, yeah, God's a zillion miles up in the sky somewhere, and I'm this little lowly, worthless sinner. And now I know that I'm a droplet of God. Like the Buddha said, we're each like a drop of water in the oceanic divine. And so that's one of the most important things to know. First, you don't really die. Secondly, you're not separate from others. Can't lose loved ones, people, and pets. And thirdly, you're inextricably interconnected with the ground of all beings. So when you know those things, how life is really set up, that's when you're free, that's when you're at peace, that's when you can handle anything that comes along.
I love that. I mean, you're literally explaining my own near-death experience. So, because I was shown the grid and I was told everything on Earth is connected and everything's connected up to this grid. And that's really how I work today. It's that understanding of how we are all connected. We're all part of source. And I love that analogy. We're a drop of water in the ocean, right? Because we're all connected. We're all one in the end. Um, when you said, do you think that you said, were you asking people that came close to death? And, did you experience anything unusual? Now, I had my near death experience in the ER in 1992, and then a second one later on, 94. And that nurse that came in, they sent me a Norwegian nurse because they figured she could bond with me because I was Swedish. And she asked me, did you experience anything unusual yesterday in the ER? I was petrified of telling her anything because I figured if I tell her that I left my body and all these things that happened, and this morning I heard my sister-in-law talking to me in the ceiling that passed away 2 weeks ago, right? And it all started, and I didn't have any belief system myself. So I told this nurse, no, no, nothing unusual happened at all because my belief system wasn't in a place where I was ready to share it because I was afraid they were going to put me in the psych ward. Do you think that, did you ever have a feeling that there were people that had an experience, but maybe they weren't telling you?
Well, first of all, I hope I didn't use the word unusual because that would skew what patients told me. And I said, do you remember anything? I just tried to leave it open-ended like that. Secondly, my nature was such that people opened up to me easily. I had several people verbalize it like this way. They said, I don't know why I'm telling you, but there's something about you. So I'm the guy everybody told their weird stuff to. And so I like to think, and also because I spent some time with them, going in giving breathing treatments. So they saw I was, approachable and a good guy. And so I like to think, but as you say, back then, especially, we're talking the early to mid 70s, there certainly was fear. Back then, psychiatrists could, put you away for all sorts of things. And so that's why it's so wonderful now where people can talk about it openly. We have whole organizations like IANS. And so, yeah, we're in a new realm and we're in a very exciting realm. All these things are coming together or have come together. And our job, of course, is just to let people know that so they can start living accordingly and make our world a better place.
Um, I love that. And what have you discovered about the nature of consciousness and life after death? A lot of people say, consciousness is made in the brain. What do you, how would you approach that?
Yeah, that's no longer a quest. I've been blessed to be a colleague of Gary Schwartz, PhD, for over 8 years now, closely 10 before that. And so he's been working on the question of survival of consciousness, which is how scientists, clinicians address it. And he started it's called the Academy for the Advances of Post-Materialist Science. He and Marjorie Woolacott, who's a neuroscientist. And I think the last I heard, they had several hundred physicians, psychologists, university professors, all of whom have as their working model that consciousness operates independently of the human brain. And of course, we know that from NDE research, again, with documented NDEs. And by documented, I mean that the patients who were verifiably clinically dead, despite that, their eyes are closed, they're in ER or ICU, they're able to observe events down the hall, outside the hospital, on top of the hospital. And my dear friend Ken Ring, PhD, who started IANS and perhaps has interviewed more NDErs than anyone on the planet, said estimated recently that there are over 10,000 of these documented cases, including some people who have been blind from birth, and yet when their body died, um, they were able to sense and see rightly. So yeah, consciousness is a term we use synonymously with soul, mind, capitalize that, info energy, because you understand that really what's going on is a dance of energy. It's all, the Hindu rishis understood so much about this several thousand years BC. They said that what's the nature of reality? It's God breathing. And when God breathes in, there appears to be nothingness, formlessness. And when God exhales, there appears to be physicality, formless, formed. Well, then, fast forward 4,000 years or so go later, and quantum physics physicists are saying the same thing. What's the nature of reality? Well, it operates on a cusp. On one hand, you could say it's a particle, it's solid, it's material, but on the other hand, it's spirit, it's energy, it's a wave. And really what happens is on the cusp of that, and also, of course, depends on the observer, which is why it's so important to quiet the brain, because as you know, the brain perceives much less than 1% of reality. Again, and in Buddhist literature, they say the brain is a wonderful slave, but it's a wonderful slave, yeah, but a horrible master, because the brain thinks it knows everything when in fact it senses very little. So yeah, that's why we need to quiet the mind, understand who we are, who is with us always, and then that's when we can do what we came here to do. And then regarding the afterlife, that's very um, closely tied to consciousness because it's quite clear now that the quality of consciousness, the initial experience a person has, and much of this information comes from the wonderful work of Michael Newton, PhD, Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls, founder of the Life Between Lives therapy, that, the old saying, you can't take it with you. Well, what you do take is your consciousness, your degree of awareness, your love. And so the afterlife would be quite different, for example, for Mother Teresa versus Adolf Hitler.
Do you so you're saying the consciousness survives the physical death. And then what happens to consciousness? That do we come back in a different bodysuit, or what? Do you know anything about that?
I know a lot about it. That's one nice thing about getting older. If you study something in depth for 50 years, you're going to know a lot. So keep in mind that the word consciousness is synonymous with energy. So I use this analogy. Most of us have a um, electrical big cable coming into our house. And then that cable splits off into smaller wires and so on that supply TV, a toaster, lights, and so on. Well, it's the same with our soul's energy. Again, Michael Newton estimated, based on, I think they're up to 60,000 cases now of life between lives, that the average human only uses about 40% of the totality of their being, their energy, their consciousness to manifest in this human experience. That means some of that energy can be in other space-time slices of life, and some never leaves home. So as far as the what consciousness wants to do after passing on, first of all, only part of it just passed on. That, say, other 60% was already in heaven, the really real place, and some of it could be off having other adventures. But it just depends on what a person wants to do. It's a free will universe. What does a person, in hopefully communication with their guides, angels, master teachers, and the like, what do they know that they need to do next? Do they need to develop more compassion? Or do they need to become more courageous, develop love? And so then they design an experience, and it could be on Earth or it could be elsewhere, or perhaps that learning would best occur home, and then they do that for a while. The One of the important things for people to understand is eternity. It's beyond, no beginning, no end. But here's one that does a good job of addressing it. This is from the Hindu literature. They say, imagine a solid granite mountain 6 miles high, 6 miles long, and 6 miles wide. Every 100 years, and I get teared up just thinking about it. I mean, how wonderful life is set up. Every 100 years, a dove flies over this mountain range with a silk scarf in its beak and lightly brushes the top of it. Consider how long it would take that process to wear the mountain flat. That's the first day of eternity. So when people, get worried, oh, I've got cancer, I'm dying, I wish I weren't getting old or whatever, you're just like, this time on earth is a blink of an eye span of eternity. And to people who are awakened, they realize this physical body is as inconsequential as a sweater we wore when we were in third grade. So that's the sort of perspective as you gain that helps you deal with anything, and then be a bright light in the world, no matter where you are, on Earth or elsewhere.
So would you say that consciousness survives the physical death and we come back again in a different human body?
If
Does
we
this,
want, some people have had enough of the earthly experience. For some, it's too cruel and difficult, and they say, I'm not coming back. Others have gotten their money's worth as far as the earthly experiences, like, I don't think there's anything else to learn here. I've been here 1,000 times. So, the universe is so vast. I saw an article recently by a prominent astrophysicist who was scheduled to give a weekend conference with Stephen Hawking just before he passed. So that's the level this woman is. And she said she was talking, it was going to be on the Metaverse, META, which is their term for the cosmos. or multiverse. And she said that, how large the universe is that we understand now, Hubble telescope and others, Webb, showing us the known physical universe. She said, well, that universe is like a grain of sand to the multiverse, to the metaverse, all that exists. So that's why when somebody says, well, does our consciousness come back to Earth? Maybe, but, maybe it wants to go somewhere else. It's kind of like taking vacations. Some people like go to the same place every year, and some people like go to a different place every year.
I love that. So the multiverse. So there are, other planetary life forms out there that we might not be aware of. And so you're saying maybe you go, to this other planet for a while and then you come back to Earth.
Yeah, these are great questions, by the way. I hope your viewers appreciate the depth and really the sacred nature of what you're asking. Well, first of all, are there other forms of intelligent life in the metaverse? I'll use Dr. Carl Sagan's answer. He said, well, if there aren't, it's certainly a huge waste of space. Which, yeah, which is
I
really
love
good.
that.
Yeah, but keep in mind the energy manifests in different ways, like we're saying, the toaster and the TV and the light. So in that sense, your energy, for example, can manifest as you, could manifest as a quote alien, being in another uh, universe. Um, a formless being who's just pure energy and is learning and growing that way, but doesn't need a human form or a physical form of any type. So the the possibilities are really endless. Many years ago, I've been blessed to have three dear friends who were Native American teachers. And as mentioned before we start, I live in the land where the Shawnee were Tecumseh, a great chief. And they understood so much. They had a very well-developed cosmology. And so one of these teachers showed me a painting, it was probably 30 years ago, and it was a brave in profile, and right above the brave was a grizzly bear and pine trees, and then an eagle soaring, and then the moon and the stars. And he said, look at this, Mark. What do you think this means? I said, well, I think it means that who we really are is much more than what's in this body, and it can experience life from different levels. And he said, that is correct. So it's the the topic is called multilocation or simultaneous realities. And let me find the articles I'm citing are at my website, soulproof.com. And that one's article number 75 to understand more how our life force can indeed manifest in different times and places simultaneously. And there's some good um, clinical and even early scientific evidence for that.
So are you saying like when people have remote viewing and they're in one place, but they're simultaneously experiencing an event that's taking place somewhere else?
Right. Yeah, there's no doubt that exists. And that's part of, to me, that's just another demonstration. In other words, some people have psychokinetic powers, move objects. Mediums, of course, can perceive and communicate with, quote, dead people. So the senses are so much more expansive than most people realize. And these people, whether it's remote viewing or the other things we just mentioned, are demonstrating that our senses can reach much further. I do I created a technique called the facilitated afterlife technique. It's described in article number 9, again at soulproof.com. And all of my audio programs, I have 10, involve hypnosis slash deep relaxation, again, to quiet the brain. So the brain sets aside, and the other 99.999% of your consciousness can then come to the fore. I work a lot with a group called Helping Parents Heal, a bereaved parents group. And I have led this technique with thousands of parents. And afterwards, I take a poll. How many of you had one or more meaningful contacts with your child, seeing, hearing, feeling, or knowing, objectively, outwardly, or subjectively, inwardly? And so far, everyone has raised their hand. So that's really how easy it is to expand your senses with a little practice. Um, and that's one way to, by the way, continue a different kind but very meaningful relationship with loved ones who have passed on till you join them.
Yeah, we truly are, miraculous beings, and we have so much more power to connect with the things that are beyond the physical, right? And connecting with the spirit world, connecting with loved ones on the other side. And it's just a matter of like you said, teaching people how to connect. And I always tell people we can all sing happy birthday. It doesn't mean we're going to be Taylor Swift tomorrow, right? But we can all sing. But it's the same thing with when you talk about connecting with the spirit world. We all have that ability within us because we are spiritual creatures. We're all connected. We're all one, right? Like Einstein said, it's an illusion that we're separate, because we're not separate. We are all connected. And when we look at, who we are in this life, as we pass on to the other side, and now we're if we are communicating with loved ones on the other side, when that soul decides to come back, do we then bring the memories from our past lives with us and then continue to grow that experience as a soul? What is
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a really good question. I trained with Brian Weiss, MD, 25 years ago, certified to do past life regressions. And of course, we spent a lot of time with that. And then Dr. Schwartz, I mentioned. So the indications are, and again, this is based on clinical, but some scientific evidence. The SoulPhone Project research we've done demonstrates that really everything about a person, except their physical body, this one continues. So yeah, their memory, their preferences, their sense of humor, their love, etc. So that continues. Um, but then you also ask, well, do those memories continue with us? And the answer is the most important ones do. If we if we could remember everything that we've learned and done over, say, the last 1,000 lifetimes, um, how would we function? I mean, most people can't even remember what they did last week. So I say we take with us what we most embody, what we've most internalized. That becomes our way of being. But as far as remembering all the little details from all kind of past, I had a patient, and one of the wonderful things, I mean, I've worked with tens and tens of thousands of patients over the years. I just met so many characters. I have so many stories. Well, this one woman came in and she's like, I'm experiencing depression, anxiety, and insomnia. And she had this big stack of journals. And she said, a big part of my life is doing past life regressions. And then I write detailed notes about all my lives. And she said, I have hundreds of lives documented here, but I can't understand why my life now is so crummy. I'm like, because you're not living this life. You're so spread out in all these other lives. You've invested so much time, energy, and money in these, quote, past lives, although I'm told it's all happening in the here and now. How about if you take a little more time and energy and tune up this earthly experience? And fortunately, she listened to me.
When people have these memories of a past life, are they having this experience simultaneously because there really isn't any time on the other side? That was one of my experiences, was that I had access to past, present, and future all at the same time. And I've heard some people say, well, you're just a fractal in this life, and you can have a life somewhere else at the same time. It could be another life here on Earth, or it could be a life in a different lifetime, or it could be a life maybe on a different planet, because we're just, like you said in the beginning, this is a certain percentage of us that's here in this earthly body. What is your understanding of that? Are we fractals that are having multiple experiences, maybe in different lifetimes at the same time? Am I also having another life in Asia right now, or maybe 400 years ago, that I'm experiencing at the same time?
The best way, Lottie, that I've found to look at this is that we as souls are having a number of virtual reality experiences at the same time. For example, right now, my fiance and I are watching, I think, 5 different shows. You know, some's comedy and some's Western and some sci-fi. And I have several books going also that I'm reading, one on fitness, one about the afterlife, one about a woman who lost her whole family in the tsunami in Indonesia. And so that's kind of like what it's like for a soul that says, yeah, I want to be a pioneer woman in the 1600s. I want to be a Viking in the 1400s. And I want to be in a realm where it's all just energy and beauty and no physicality. Well, you can do that. That's what's possible. But I would say to people that first, I would say, let's get grounded on Earth, okay? Because what most of us are aware of is we're on Earth. So create the greatest life of your dreams, be healthy, be grounded. And then if you have time, energy, or motivation to venture out a bit, do that. But cover those important bases first, because I've met many people and some of my friends, they're so much on the spiritual path and wanting to check out all these far out things, but they don't have money to, fix their car when it breaks down. They live in perpetual fear because they haven't dealt with basic things like health and income and relationships.
Yeah, I love that. Sometimes people get too carried away with, what is out there and forgetting to be present in this life, right? It's coming
Right.
back to being the present. Um, Now I know you worked a lot on that SoulPhone project, and conducted, groundbreaking research on spirit communication. What can you share with the listeners about, this, what is the SoulPhone project?
Yes, as mentioned, Dr. Schwartz has been working on it for 25 years. And let's back up. He was a professor at Harvard, then a tenured professor at Yale, where he was a pioneer in the field of mind-body medicine, which is a huge field. And he was one of 4 people that got it started. Oh my gosh. Well, then he went into energy healing and investigated. He was one of the first real scientists who investigated things like healing touch and Reiki and verified that, at least in the hands of great practitioners, it's very powerful, verifiably so. Well, then he turned his attention to then the question of survival of consciousness, which is another way of saying, is there really life after death? And he's performed a number of incredible experiments. And I created 3 videos about this. So if people visit soulphone.org, they can see that series that tells about past, present, and future research. But again, the different experiments he did were all seeking to allow communication with what we call post-material persons. That's our favorite term for those who have passed on, because, as mentioned, they're everything they were before except this earthly body. So post-material persons. So some of his devices, for example, showed that they have physicality, or at least can have when they want to, depending on who they're interacting with, that they can make sounds, that they can have a visual image. And so we've learned so much about what we call the physics of spirit. But all along, all of those were not considered to be a practical device because his goal is, and he asked me 8, 9 years ago now to be the spokesperson for the SoulPhone Project. And also, I'm a research assistant and I help strategic planning with him, kind of his right hand. But all along, the goal has been to develop technology that's as accurate, reliable, and affordable as current cell phone technology so that we can text and type with our loved ones who have passed, so that we can talk with them, and so that we can see and hear them like we're doing now at video conferencing. So the early devices he used, while it showed the things I mentioned, physicality and so on, they were too huge and they were too expensive to commercialize. So all these years now, it's been working toward first what we call the soul switch. A switch allows a binary yes and no answer. And the switch was never considered to be a service or take-home device, but a component of the soul keyboard. That will be then the first service and then perhaps later take-home device where people can text and type with their loved ones. And as well as their loved ones, also another very important group of post-material persons, and that is luminaries, scientists, inventors, educators, religious teachers. What did Jesus really say? What did Buddha really say? Um, True leaders, and Lord knows our world could use those, and healers, for example. And so that we've already communicated with them through multiple mediums independently. And the question was, when we develop the technology, whether it's a keyboard or soul voice, would you all be willing to give webinars for people on Earth and share your insight? How can we cure cancer? How can we achieve peace? How can we develop free energy, etc.? And the answers were, of course we would. And I think Tesla commented, you'll break the internet. And one of the mediums started laughing when I asked that question, would you be willing to give webinars? And she said, they're pushing each other out of the way to get first in line. So that's how much people who are geniuses on earth, leaders in their field, they've continued working in the next realm on that, and they want to share their input, but we need a way to, we say, give a voice to spirit. I mean, Dr. Schwartz did the first scientific research on mediums. His book is called The Afterlife Experiments. John Edward was one of the people he researched, for example. This is not the late 1990s, but even the very best mediums, and we have some of the best who work with our team with the project, are only about 75, 80% accurate. And they can have good and bad days, and they can develop what we call monkey mind, where their brain gets involved in it. So we want reliable, 100% accurate or close to it, near real-time communication. And so everything's going very well. It's very difficult project because the sensors, the technology we use are so sensitive to detect post-material persons that it can detect all sorts of other things. One device, for example, we had to use in the middle of the night because if there was a car driving in the parking lot outside the office, the sensors would pick that up. So you can see why no one else has perfected it yet. But I would say everything is going beautifully. Dr. Schwartz considers that it's no longer a question of if we develop this technology, it's a matter of when. And we will keep people posted as much as we can. We hope to later this year, and it could be late this year, have two events. And one is global announcements that life after death has been scientifically proven. And secondly, public demonstrations of the best current technology then. And both of those events, of course, will have a huge impact on things. And we're preparing to do that in the most optimal way.
I love that. I remember I learned about the soul phone. I think it was back in 2016 when the first time I heard about it.
Hmm.
Um, and it's such a great concept. I mean, it makes you really think of just pick up your phone and dial in. And it's interesting about the mediums, right? How do you get it to be perfect and picking up the signals that are coming from the other side? And it's just that the fine tuning. But when we think about when I was a little kid, we had the rotary dial phone, right? And now we got cell phones. And we used to joke about as children, we used to have these little blocks and we used to pretend that this was a phone and a television and this little, tiny wooden block. And I remember my friend's mom said, you have great fantasies, I as children. And here we are, right? And our lives are so different than they were when I grew up back in the 1960s. So all the people that are listening to this and saying, wow, this is amazing. Like there's actually science behind, proving that we are still there when we go to the other side. It's just we leave the body behind on Earth, but we as people or conscious people are still there on the other side. How can people learn more about, all the work you're doing? I know you've written several books. Is there any particular book that you would recommend to the listeners if they're interested in learning more about the afterlife?
Well, it depends on what their needs are. So I would encourage, well, first of all, to wrap up on the SoulPhone Project. Again, the website is soulphone.org. And then the articles that share the scientific, clinical, and experiential evidence for life after death are articles number 160 and 115 at soulproof.com. Regarding my resources, the um, almost everything is free now. I just decided yesterday to make everything but the printed books free. Um, and so I have 125 newsletters, I'm sorry, articles that address every question I've been asked from people around the world. What happens when a loved one is murdered, when a loved one passed by suicide. I am in the process of dying. What's the afterlife really like? What is God like? What happens to evildoers, etc. So 125 free articles. 25 free radio shows, interviews I did. I had two different radio shows over the years where I interviewed people like Wayne Dyer, some I've mentioned, Michael Newton, Brian Weiss, Dr. Schwartz, Raymond Moody, Anita Moorjani, Carolyn Mace. I mean, just brilliant minds. And you can hear the interviews with them on that. Free newsletters at both soulproof.com and soulphone.org. But then, yes, I have 8 books and they have a range. So it depends on what a person most, in other words, if they want to know for a fact there's life after death, then I wrote a book called The Afterlife Evidence. Or if they want to ask, they have all kind of questions they would like my best answers to, wrote a book called Ask the Soul Doctor. And I answer 171 of the most commonly asked questions. And then I have 10 audio programs I mentioned that allow us to do things like visit with loved ones who have passed, to ask your soul, your angels in the light, questions, to explore the question of pre-birth planning. Did I really plan certain events during this earthly experience? If so, what was I thinking, and how can I best fulfill all that? Past life regressions, etc. How to identify your soul's mission. So those are all under audio programs. And as I mentioned, my website, people are working on it. I just sent this morning. So hold off because everything but the printed books are going to be free. I decided I want this to be available to all people around the world. I just recently read that the average income, gosh, I forget what country now, um, it's only $40 a month, the average income per person. And so I was thinking, well, my products are only $15. I mean, that's very reasonable, but some people, they can't afford that. And then other countries have exchange problems, like they can't use our credit card system. So I've I'm launching several programs, Lottie. I'll just like take a moment and share. So the first is called Greater Reality Healing, and it's described in article number 82. So this is a evidence-based information and holistic resource way to journey from deeply grieving to brightly shining. And I've worked with many parents who have done this. They're like near-death experiencers. They're the most incredibly loving, peaceful, giving people I know, joyful. And some of them have had two, three, or more kids who have passed. It's an incredible demonstration of what's possible. So I drew from everything I've done and created a program for the rest of us. You know, people have had a spouse pass, best friend, sibling, pet. So article number 82. Then article number 119 is called Greater Reality Helping, how to help yourself, others, and our planet. And so I encourage people to see those two, 82 and 119, to, if they're grieving, what they can do about it. And then if they feel called, as many more evolved souls do, they feel called to help, to make a difference, but they don't know how to get started. And this provides a program working with others to make that happen. And we'll have online meetings and then in-person meetings later this year. So those are the resources. And the other thing I say to people is, if you have questions, just email me, mark@soulproof.com. I have templates, and it literally takes me 5 minutes to provide really good personalized answers. And as long as I can, I'll keep doing that, because every person I help a little bit, and same way with you, then when they awaken and they brighten the corner where they are, then we had a small part in that, and that's how our world comes together. We're really at the tipping point. It's a matter of people helping people realize there is hope, and here's one way we can do it.
Oh, I love that. And we're going to make sure we put the notes in the podcast notes as well so people can, find different things you're referencing
Okay.
easily. And my last question to you is, what do you think is the meaning of life?
Hmm. Well, the years ago I worked out an acronym for why souls come to Earth, which is a little different, but it overlaps the meaning of life. So the most common reason souls come to Earth is to serve. So the acronym is SAGE, the word SAGE, SAGE. The S is serve others. The A is to have adventures. The G is to grow, learn, and evolve. And the E is to enjoy. But the meaning of life for me would be to realize what we've been talking about, that we're part of God, and that we're in this marvelous adventure. That's one reason I like the brilliant scholar and author Joseph Campbell so much. He talked about the hero's journey. So the meaning of life is, there is ultra meaning. Life is so much. I'll share this. Years ago, I was just starting to wake up, that stage where you like open one eye, what time is it? But I realized some very profound saying had been going around in my head, and I didn't want to lose it. So I closed my eyes again, pretended I was asleep, and I caught the last round. And it was, this earthly experience is a totally safe, meaningful, and magnificent adventure amidst forever. So when people realize that, then they can relax. They can realize there's nothing to fear. Native Americans knew that. They didn't even have a word for the concept of fear. And then, yeah, you just have forever to enjoy, to learn, to grow, to help others. It's a good life.
I love that. That's such a great lesson, to that there is nothing to fear, because I think a lot of people in the world today, we're living in fear. We're fear with the social media and all the news, and it's all clickbait to make us look, right? Because it drives, we want to feel safe as human beings. It's just the nervous system's response. And it drives us, to click on those things because of the fear that we feel. But ultimately, there isn't any fear. So I love that. That's such a great message to our audience and our listeners around the world. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be a guest on the podcast. It was thoroughly enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Thank you for being such a bright light and sharing this. Take care.
As we conclude this episode, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for your presence within my community. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe, comment, like, and share this podcast episode. Join my free newsletter in the show notes and receive new podcast episodes delivered right to your inbox. If you resonate with the interconnectedness of mind, body, and soul, and are motivated to embark on a journey of personal healing, I invite you to connect with me at drlottie.com. Together, we can pave a path towards transformative healing in your own life.